The ancient dragon Vorthak lay dying in the crystalline caverns of Xerion Prime, her once magnificent scales now dulled to the color of ash. For 3,000 years she had been the last of her kind, watching civilizations rise and fall while the poison from the Kethmori weapons slowly consumed her from within. The Galactic Council had declared her species extinct centuries ago, but Vorthak endured, sustained only by the fierce love for her single remaining egg. The egg pulsed with a faint amber light, suspended in a biostasis field that flickered dangerously. Vorthak's massive clawed hand trembled as she adjusted the failing machinery with delicate precision. The technology was ancient, predating even the oldest spacefaring races, and no one in the galaxy understood how it worked anymore. Every repair attempt by the galaxy's finest engineers had failed spectacularly, some even making the deterioration worse. "Mother," came a weak telepathic whisper from within the egg. The hatchling had been trying to break free for over a year now, but the stasis field kept it trapped in an endless state of almost birth. "I can feel your pain growing stronger." Vorthak closed her enormous golden eyes, each the size of a starship viewport. The neural link between mother and unborn child was both blessing and curse. Her offspring could sense every wave of agony that coursed through her ancient body, every moment of despair when another attempted cure failed. "Peace, little star," she whispered back, her mental voice like distant thunder. "I will find a way. I will not let you die with me." But they both knew the truth. The Galactic Medical Consortium had exhausted every possibility. The Synthetic Intelligence Collective had run 1 trillion simulations. Even the mysterious Voidwalkers, beings of pure energy who transcended physical form, had examined her condition and declared it hopeless. The poison was designed by a race that had vanished eons ago specifically to kill dragons, and it was succeeding with ruthless efficiency. Outside the cavern, Ambassador HFY of the Triangulum Council waited in his sleek diplomatic vessel. The insectoid being had made the journey to Xerion Prime to deliver the final verdict personally. Though his 4 eyes showed genuine sorrow behind their multifaceted surfaces. "Great Vorthak," he called out through the cave's entrance, his voice artificially amplified by his translator unit. "I bring word from the Council of 12 Galaxies." "Speak your words, old friend," Vorthak replied, her massive head rising slightly. She had known HFY for 800 years, had watched him evolve from a young diplomat to one of the most respected voices in galactic politics. "The Council has voted, after consultation with every known medical authority, every technological specialist, and every mystical practitioner in our databases." HFY paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. "They recommend you be allowed to die in peace. The hatchling should be preserved in the stasis field indefinitely, as a monument to your species." A sound like grinding mountains escaped Vorthak's throat. "They would make my child a museum piece." "It is the kindest solution they could conceive," HFY said quietly. "The stasis technology can potentially last for millennia. Perhaps someday future civilizations will find a way to what? To study the last dragon like a specimen in a laboratory?" Vorthak's mental voice carried such fury that several nearby crystal formations cracked. "My child will not spend eternity as a curiosity for beings who lack the wisdom to preserve life." HFY's antennae drooped. He had expected this reaction, but protocol demanded he make the offer. "Is there truly nothing else? No other path you wish to explore?" Vorthak was quiet for a long moment, her vast mind sifting through possibilities she had already considered thousands of times. Then, like a spark in the darkness, she remembered something. A fragment of conversation from decades past, dismissed at the time as irrelevant. "There is one option I have not pursued," she said slowly. "Name it, and the Council will mobilize every resource." "No," Vorthak said, surprising him. "This must be done in secret, and it must be done by my hatchling, not by me." HFY's translator struggled with the tonal complexities of draconic speech, but the determination was unmistakable. "Great Vorthak, your offspring cannot survive outside the stasis field for more than minutes. The journey to any medical facility would—" "I am not speaking of medical facilities." Vorthak's eyes opened again, and for the first time in years, they held a glimmer of hope. "I am speaking of humans." The word hung in the air like a foreign concept. Humans were barely a century into their space age, confined to a small cluster of worlds in what the galaxy considered the absolute backwater regions of space. They had no representatives on any major council, No significant technology, no achievements worthy of galactic attention. Humans, Zexhai repeated, certain his translator had malfunctioned. The species that still uses chemical propulsion for most of their vessels? The ones who haven't even mastered basic genetic manipulation? The same species that repaired a Zerithian dreadnought using nothing but scavenged parts and primitive welding techniques? Vorthak countered. The same species that somehow convinced a hive mind to negotiate individual rights. The same species that looked at the quantum locks on Alterian tomb worlds and picked them open with what they called trial and error. Zexhai's mind raced through the implications. Those incidents were classified, known only to the highest levels of galactic government. Humans had indeed accomplished the impossible on several occasions, but always through means that proper civilizations considered crude, dangerous, or simply insane. Their methods are unorthodox, he admitted carefully. Unorthodox enough that they might see solutions where others see only impossibility, Vorthak said. My hatchling believes in them. In their dreams they speak of human ingenuity, human determination. Perhaps the neural link allows them to perceive something I cannot. Inside the stasis field, the hatchling's consciousness stirred with excitement. Through the cosmic awareness that dragons possessed even before birth, they had sensed something unique about the human species, a quality that transcended their primitive technology and limited understanding of the universe. I will go to them, the hatchling declared, their mental voice stronger than it had been in months. I will find one who can help. The journey alone could kill you, Vorthak warned, though her massive heart swelled with pride at her offspring's courage. Then I will die trying rather than die waiting. Zexhai listened to this exchange with growing alarm. The plan forming in his mind violated approximately 47 interstellar treaties and would likely result in his immediate exile from the diplomatic corps. If you are truly determined to pursue this course, he said finally, I may know of a human who could help, but the risks are mine to take, the hatchling interrupted. Tell me of this human. Marcus Chen wiped grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades, squinting at the alien engine block suspended above his makeshift workshop. The Caltharian freighter captain who'd brought it claimed the thing was impossible to repair, that the quantum resonance chambers were too badly damaged for any known technology to fix. Marcus had heard that song before from a dozen different species, and it usually meant they just hadn't tried the right combination of percussive maintenance and creative profanity. His workshop occupied the lower levels of Freeport Station, a ramshackle trading post on the edge of human space where the desperate, the stupid, and the broke came to get their ships patched up by someone who charged in Earth coffee beans and asked no questions. The other mechanics in the sector called him crazy for working with alien tech. But Marcus had discovered something the rest of the galaxy seemed to have forgotten. Most problems had simple solutions if you weren't afraid to get your hands dirty. Friday. Run a diagnostic on the tertiary coolant flow, he called out to his AI assistant, a heavily modified navigation computer he'd salvaged from a crashed exploration vessel. Marcus, I must remind you that Caltharian quantum engines operate on principles that human science has not yet catalogued. Friday replied in her patiently exasperated tone. The probability of successful repair approaches 0. Yeah, well, the probability of me caring about what's impossible approaches 0 too. Marcus activated his scanning array, a cobbled-together collection of human, Centauri, and 3 different alien sensor systems that shouldn't have worked together, but somehow did. Besides, impossible just means nobody's been stupid enough to try yet. The scanner revealed what he'd suspected. The quantum chambers weren't damaged at all. They were locked in a recursive feedback loop that was actually a safety protocol, designed to prevent catastrophic overload. The problem was that the safety system was written in a programming language that had been extinct for 2,000 years, and every attempt to override it using modern techniques only reinforced the lockout. Marcus grinned and cracked his knuckles. Friday, fire up the universal translator and patch me into the engine's core logic. Marcus, that could electrocute you, irradiate you, or potentially transform you into exotic matter. Tuesday's still young, he replied, already connecting the jury-rigged interface cables to his neural jack. The technology was considered barbarically primitive by galactic standards, but it let him communicate directly with alien systems in ways their designers never intended. The quantum engine's core felt like trying to read a book written in mathematics and translated into music. Marcus closed his eyes and let his intuition guide him through the labyrinthine code structures, looking for the patterns that existed below conscious thought. There, buried under layers of security protocols and fail-safes, was the heart of the problem, a simple logic gate that had been tripped by an electromagnetic pulse and never reset. He reached out with a mental command, the human equivalent of turning something off and turning it back on again, and felt the ancient system purr back to life. Impossible, Friday muttered as the quantum chambers began their harmonic resonance cycle. According to my databases, that repair should have required a complete core replacement and 6 months of recalibration. That's because databases don't account for the power of not giving a damn about the proper procedure, Marcus said, disconnecting from the system and stretching his aching neck. Sometimes the best tool for the job is a complete willingness to ignore how things are supposed to work. A soft chime from his communication array interrupted his satisfaction. The incoming signal was heavily encrypted and routed through at least a dozen relay stations, which usually meant either very good news or very bad trouble. In Marcus's experience, it was almost always the latter. Unknown caller, you're speaking to Chen's Impossible Repairs, where we fix the unfixable and charge reasonable rates for miracles. The voice that answered was unlike anything he'd ever heard, like distant thunder translated into telepathic whispers. Human Marcus Chen, I am HFY of the Triangulum Council. I have been given your name by sources I cannot reveal, in connection with a matter of extreme urgency. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The Triangulum Council was Major League Galactic Politics, the kind of organization that normally wouldn't acknowledge humanity's existence unless we'd accidentally blown up a star or something equally embarrassing. Let me guess, Marcus said. You've got something that's broken, everyone else says it can't be fixed, and somebody told you the crazy human might be dumb enough to try. Your reputation for achieving the impossible precedes you, HFY replied. And Marcus could hear something like hope in the alien's synthesized voice. However, this situation is far more complex than a simple mechanical repair. Are you familiar with the dragons of the ancient galaxy? The big space lizards that supposedly went extinct before humans figured out fire? Marcus leaned back in his chair, suddenly very interested. I've heard stories, but I thought they were myths. They are not myths. One remains, dying slowly from an ancient poison. Her hatchling is trapped in a failing stasis field, and every attempt to repair the containment system has failed. The dragon believes that human methods might succeed where others have not. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Dragons were legendary throughout the galaxy, beings of such power and wisdom that entire civilizations had worshipped them as gods. The idea that the last dragon was dying while her child remained trapped was the kind of tragedy that made his chest tight with rage. What makes you think I can help where entire teams of galactic experts have failed? Because, HFY said quietly, the hatchling specifically requested you. What? Marcus almost fell out of his chair. How does an unborn dragon even know I exist? Dragons possess a form of cosmic awareness that transcends normal understanding. The hatchling claims to have sensed your work across vast distances, felt the resonance of your successes in the quantum substrate of reality itself. They believe you represent something unique among the galaxy's repair specialists. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing through the implications. If this was real, if there really was a dying dragon and her trapped offspring, then he was being offered the chance to save not just lives, but an entire species. On the other hand, it could be an elaborate trap, a test by galactic authorities, or simply the ravings of a desperate being grasping at impossible hope. What exactly would I be walking into? He asked finally. Zerion Prime, a dead world in the outer spiral. The dragon Vorthak maintains a sanctuary in the crystal caverns where her people once lived. The technology involved is older than most civilizations, operating on principles that our scientists admit they do not fully understand. And the hatchling? Dying. The stasis field that preserves them is failing, and their life force weakens with each passing day. Even if we could somehow repair the field, the hatchling refuses to remain trapped indefinitely. They have chosen to risk everything on a journey to find you. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. He'd spent his entire career fixing the impossible, proving that human ingenuity could triumph over alien certainty. But this was different. This was about preserving something irreplaceable. something that could never be replaced if he failed. "When do we leave?" he asked. "The hatchling departs Zirian Prime within the hour," HFY replied, relief evident in his voice. "I will transmit coordinates for an intercept course. Marcus Chen, I must warn you. If this attempt fails, both you and the hatchling will likely die. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" Marcus was already moving toward his emergency kit, muscle memory guiding him through preparations he'd made 100 times before. Tools, spare parts, medical supplies, and the portable fusion reactor that had saved his life more times than he could count. "Ambassador," he said, slinging his equipment pack over his shoulder. "I've built my entire career on doing things that should be impossible. I'm not about to stop now, especially not when the last dragon in the galaxy needs help." The hatchling's escape from Zirian Prime should have been impossible, but desperation had a way of making the impossible merely dangerous. As Vorthak lay dying in her crystal cavern, her offspring had used their developing telepathic abilities to interface directly with the ancient stasis chamber, overriding safety protocols that had protected dragon young for millennia. The biopod that contained the hatchling was little more than an organic escape vessel, a translucent sphere of living tissue that pulsed with amber light. It drifted through space at sublight speeds, following navigation coordinates that HFY had discreetly transmitted before his official departure from the system. The pod's life support systems were failing gradually, giving the young dragon perhaps 72 hours before the cold vacuum of space claimed another victim. Marcus intercepted the biopod 12 hours out from Freeport Station, using his modified salvage ship's tractor beam to draw the fragile sphere into his cargo bay. As the bay pressurized, he got his first real look at what he'd committed to saving, and the sight stopped him cold. The hatchling was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Even trapped within the translucent walls of their biopod, he could see the delicate bone structure of developing wings, scales that shifted between silver and gold depending on the angle of light, and eyes that held intelligence far beyond their years. The young dragon was perhaps the size of a large horse, but their presence filled the cargo bay with an almost tangible sense of ancient wisdom. "Hello, Marcus Chen," came a voice inside his head, gentle as a summer breeze but carrying undertones of cosmic depth. "I apologize for the informal introduction, but circumstances are somewhat pressing." Marcus nearly dropped his scanner. He'd been briefed on dragon telepathy, but experiencing it firsthand was like having someone whisper directly into his soul. "Can you hear my thoughts too?" "Only what you choose to share," the hatchling replied, and Marcus could sense amusement in the mental tone. "Dragons are not mind readers, despite what the stories claim. We simply communicate in ways that transcend spoken language." "Right," Marcus said, running his scanner over the biopod's surface. "Well, let's see what we're dealing with here. These readings are... Wow, this thing is alive, isn't it? Like actually alive, not just biological technology. The pod is grown rather than built, shaped by draconic will and sustained by life force. It was meant to carry me for only a few hours, but desperation has extended its function beyond safe limits." The hatchling's mental voice carried a note of concern. "I can feel its distress. It knows it is dying to keep me alive." Marcus felt his throat tighten. The idea of one living being sacrificing itself to preserve another was the kind of nobility that humans talked about, but rarely achieved. "Can I help it? Can I do something to ease its burden?" "Your concern honors you," the hatchling said softly. "But the pod has already given all it can. We must focus on ensuring its sacrifice serves its purpose." Marcus nodded grimly and began connecting his diagnostic equipment to the biopod's external interfaces. The readings that came back made no sense according to human understanding of biology, but Marcus had learned to trust patterns over knowledge. The pod was indeed dying, its cellular structure breaking down as it expended its life force to maintain the hatchling's survival. "I'm going to need to get you out of there," Marcus said. "My ship can provide life support, but I need to understand your physiology first." "What do you need to survive?" "Warmth, clean air, and electromagnetic stability," the hatchling replied. "Dragons are creatures of energy as much as flesh. We draw sustenance from stellar radiation, cosmic background fields, and the quantum fluctuations that permeate space itself." Marcus blinked. "You eat starlight?" "Among other things. It is why my people could survive in the vacuum of space for extended periods. However, my development is incomplete. I require more traditional forms of nourishment as well." Right, baby food for dragons. I'm sure there's a manual for that somewhere. Marcus began preparing the cargo bay, adjusting atmospheric controls and activating the emergency medical systems he'd installed after too many close calls with alien physiology. The real question is, what's wrong with you that's keeping you trapped? HFY mentioned a stasis field malfunction, but I'm not seeing any technological components here. The hatchling was quiet for a moment, and Marcus sensed sadness radiating from the biopod. The stasis field is not technological, Marcus Chen. It is biological, woven into my very genetics by my mother's people to protect their young during gestation. The field should have dissolved when I was ready to be born, but the ancient poison that kills my mother has corrupted the process. So you're trapped by your own biology. Precisely. The field recognizes my attempts to emerge as a threat to my survival, and strengthens itself accordingly. Every effort to break free only makes the prison more secure. Marcus sat down heavily on a supply crate, his mind wrestling with the problem. He'd dealt with malfunctioning technology, corrupted software, even broken magical artifacts on a few memorable occasions. But this was different. This was like trying to reprogram someone's DNA while they were still alive. What makes you think I can solve something that stumped the entire galactic medical community? He asked. Because you do not think like them, the hatchling replied immediately. I have touched the minds of many beings who attempted to help my mother and me. They approached the problem with logic, with science, with established procedures. They saw a medical condition to be cured, a technological malfunction to be repaired, and I see a puzzle to be solved, a challenge to be overcome through will and ingenuity rather than accumulated knowledge. The hatchling's mental voice grew stronger, more certain. Dragons are creatures of story, Marcus Chen. We understand that reality is shaped as much by narrative as by physics. The greatest achievements in galactic history were accomplished not by those who knew what was possible, but by those who refused to accept what was impossible. Marcus felt a familiar surge of determination, the same feeling that had driven him to fix broken alien tech with spare parts and stubbornness. Okay, kid. Let's figure out how to get you born. He spent the next several hours studying every piece of information about dragon physiology that HFY had provided, cross-referencing it with his own understanding of biological systems and the handful of similar cases he'd encountered in his career. The more he learned, the more impressed he became with the elegant complexity of draconic biology. Dragons weren't just large reptiles with wings. They were living fusion reactors, their bodies designed to process and channel energy on scales that made human technology look like stone knives. Their bones were crystalline matrices that stored and focused electromagnetic fields. Their scales were living solar collectors that could absorb radiation across the entire spectrum. Their nervous systems operated partially in hyperspace, allowing for telepathic communication across vast distances. No wonder the stasis field isn't shutting down, Marcus muttered as he reviewed the data. Your body's safety systems think you're still developing because you're not getting the energy inputs you need to complete the maturation process. The fields that once nourished young dragons no longer exist, the hatchling confirmed. The worlds where my people lived have been dead for millennia. The stellar configurations that provided optimal radiation have shifted. Even the cosmic background energy has changed as the universe aged. So we need to trick your biology into thinking you're getting what you need. Marcus stood up, pacing the length of the cargo bay as his mind raced through possibilities. I can provide artificial stellar radiation, but the cosmic background stuff, that's going to be tricky. You have an idea, it wasn't a question. The hatchling could sense the sudden shift in Marcus's thinking, the moment when inspiration struck like lightning. I have a completely insane idea, Marcus corrected, which in my experience means it might actually work. Marcus's plan violated so many safety protocols that Friday had temporarily shut down, rather than continue calculating the probability of catastrophic failure. The cargo bay now resembled a mad scientist's laboratory crossed with a nuclear reactor, filled with humming machinery that definitely wasn't designed to work together. Explain to me again why you're connecting a Centauri meditation crystal to a human fusion reactor, using Caltharian quantum cables, the hatchling said, their mental voice carrying a mixture of fascination and concern. Because, Marcus grunted as he tightened the last connection, dragons need energy inputs that don't exist anymore, right? But energy is energy. If I can't find the exact cosmic radiation you're supposed to get, I'll make something close enough to fool your biological systems. The setup was pure human engineering, at its most gloriously reckless. The fusion reactor would provide raw power. The Centauri crystal would modulate that power into harmonic frequencies that approximated stellar radiation patterns. The Caltharian quantum cables would carry the energy in phase-shifted wavelengths that mimicked cosmic background fields. It was the kind of jury-rigged solution that should have exploded spectacularly. But Marcus had learned to trust his instincts when dealing with impossible problems. The real trick, he continued, activating the primary power coupling, is timing. Your stasis field is like a really paranoid security system. It's constantly checking to make sure you're safe, and every time it detects something unusual, it locks down harder. So we need to convince it that everything's normal while gradually changing the conditions inside your biopod. The machinery hummed to life with a sound like distant thunder. Energy readings across the cargo bay spiked as the improvised system began generating the complex radiation patterns that once nourished young dragons among distant stars. Marcus monitored the output carefully, adjusting frequencies and intensities based on data that was part science, part guesswork, and part pure intuition. "I can feel it," the hatchling whispered, wonder in their mental voice. "It's not the same as the ancient fields, but it carries the same song." "How did you know?" "I didn't," Marcus admitted, watching as the biopod's surface began to glow more brightly. "But I've worked with enough alien tech to recognize patterns. Energy has fingerprints, wavelength signatures that repeat across different technologies. I figured cosmic radiation that nourished dragons might follow similar rules to stellar emissions that power other life forms." The stasis field around the hatchling shimmered, its amber light flickering as the ancient biological protocols tried to process the new energy inputs. For a moment, Marcus thought the system might reject the artificial radiation entirely, but then the field began to pulse in rhythm with the machinery. "It's working," the hatchling breathed. "The field is recognizing the energy patterns as normal environmental conditions. But Marcus, I need to warn you about something." "What kind of something?" Marcus asked, though he kept his attention on the control readings. Several systems were running close to redline, and the fusion reactor was cycling faster than he'd ever seen it operate. When the stasis field finally dissolves, the transformation will be dramatic. Dragons do not simply hatch like ordinary creatures. We emerge through a process called the awakening, where our consciousness expands to encompass our full heritage and abilities. Marcus glanced at the biopod, noting that cracks were beginning to appear in its surface. Define dramatic. Telepathic resonance across several star systems. Gravitational fluctuations. Possible localized space-time distortions. The hatchling's mental voice carried apologetic embarrassment. "I should have mentioned this earlier, but I was not certain the plan would succeed." "Space-time distortions?" Marcus's voice climbed an octave. "Kid, you're telling me that your birth might accidentally create a black hole?" "Not a black hole, precisely. More like a temporary fold in reality that allows for easier, faster-than-light travel. It's considered quite fortunate among spacefaring species, actually." Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself that he'd chosen to help save the last dragon in the galaxy. A little reality distortion was probably an acceptable side effect for preserving an extinct species. "Okay, but can you give me some warning before you go all cosmic on me?" "Of course. And Marcus, thank you. Whatever happens next, you have given me the chance to live freely rather than die trapped. That gift cannot be repaid." The biopod surface cracked further, amber light streaming through the fissures as the ancient stasis field finally began to collapse. Marcus felt the change in the air itself, a building pressure that made his teeth ache and his hair stand on end. The improvised machinery strained to maintain the artificial radiation fields, warning lights flashing as various systems approached their operational limits. "How long until—" Marcus began, but the hatchling's mental shout interrupted him. "Now. It's happening now." The biopod exploded in a burst of golden light that filled the cargo bay like a miniature sunrise. Marcus threw up his hands to shield his eyes, feeling waves of energy wash over him that seemed to resonate with something deep in his chest. When the light faded, he found himself staring at the most magnificent creature he'd ever seen. The young dragon stood nearly 3 meters tall at the shoulder, their scales shifting between silver and gold in patterns that seemed to follow the rhythm of some cosmic music. Wings that looked like they were made of crystallized starlight stretched nearly the full width of the cargo bay, and eyes like captured galaxies regarded Marcus with intelligence that spanned millennia. "Hello," Marcus Chen, the dragon said, their voice now audible as well as telepathic, like distant thunder mixed with the sound of wind through crystal caves. I am called Stellar Heart who burns with ancient fire, though friends may call me Stellar. Stellar, Marcus repeated, grinning despite the fact that his cargo bay now contained a creature that could probably eat his ship. Well, Stellar, welcome to the universe. How do you feel? The young dragon tilted their massive head, considering the question with the gravity it deserved. I feel complete. For the first time in my existence, I am not trapped between one state and another. I am alive, truly alive, and the galaxy spreads before me like an infinite story waiting to be written. Stellar's eyes suddenly widened, and their great head swung toward the ship's communications array. Marcus, something is wrong. I can sense my mother across the stars, and her life force is fading rapidly. The energy I used to escape the stasis field was drawn from our connection. In freeing myself, I may have... We need to get back to Xerion Prime, Marcus said immediately, understanding the implications. Can your mother hold on long enough for us to reach her? I do not know, Stellar replied, their mental voice heavy with grief and guilt. But I know someone who might be able to help her now that I am free to act. Who? Stellar's eyes gleamed with something that might have been hope. You, Marcus Chen. My freedom proves that human ingenuity can solve problems that have confounded the galaxy's greatest minds. If anyone can save the last adult dragon in existence, it is the human who gave life to the last hatchling. Marcus felt the familiar weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders, but this time it was accompanied by something new. The absolute certainty that he wouldn't let the dragons down. Not now, not when they'd come so far. Friday, he called out to his AI assistant. Plot a course for Xerion Prime. Maximum speed. Marcus. Friday's voice carried unusual emotion. The spatial distortions caused by Stellar's awakening have created a temporary hyperspace corridor. We can reach Xerion Prime in 6 hours instead of 3 days. Convenient, Marcus said, strapping himself into the pilot's seat while Stellar secured themselves in the cargo bay with casual grace. Not convenient, Stellar corrected gently. Destined. The universe itself is helping us return to my mother, because some stories are too important to end in tragedy. The hyperspace corridor created by Stellar's awakening deposited them in the Xerion system like a soap bubble popping in reverse, reality folding back into normal configuration with barely a whisper of displaced energy. Marcus's salvage ship emerged from the distortion field just above the crystalline surface of the dead world, close enough to the ancient caverns that they could see the faint glow emanating from their depths. She's still alive, Stellar announced, relief flooding their mental voice as they established telepathic contact with their mother. But barely. The connection we shared drained more of her life force than I realized. Marcus was already suiting up for planetary descent, checking his environmental gear and portable equipment. What's her condition? Can she hold on long enough for us to figure out a treatment? Perhaps hours, perhaps less. Stellar's great head hung low with grief and guilt. Marcus, I must tell you something about the poison that kills her. It is not merely a toxin. It is a weapon designed by the Kethmori to destroy not just draconic bodies but draconic souls. It severs the connection between our physical forms and the cosmic forces that sustain us. You're telling me it's not just medical, it's metaphysical? Precisely. The Galactic Medical Consortium could find no cure because they approached it as a purely biological problem. But dragons exist partially outside normal spacetime. The poison attacks that existence, slowly severing us from the universe itself. Marcus felt a familiar chill run down his spine, the same sensation he got when confronting a problem that seemed to exist beyond the reach of normal solutions. But he'd learned to trust that feeling, because it usually meant he was about to discover something extraordinary. All right, he said, securing his equipment pack and checking the seals on his environmental suit. Let's go meet your mother and see what we're really dealing with. The descent to Vorthak's cavern was like traveling backward through geological time. The crystal formations grew more elaborate and alien the deeper they went, until Marcus found himself walking through corridors that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Stellar moved beside him with fluid grace, their claws clicking softly against stone that rang like distant bells with each step. The crystals were grown by my people, Stellar explained as they navigated the winding passages. They store memories, emotions, and fragments of consciousness. This entire cavern system is a living archive of draconic history. Marcus ran his gloved hand along one of the crystal walls, feeling a faint vibration that seemed to resonate with his nervous system. For a moment he caught glimpses of images that weren't quite memories. Vast dragons soaring between stars, civilizations rising and falling like waves on an infinite shore, the slow dance of galaxies across eons of time. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "And dying," Stellar replied sadly. "Without living dragons to maintain them, the crystals fade. In another few centuries, all of this will be nothing but ordinary stone." They emerged into the main cavern to find Vorthak exactly as Ambassador Zexhai had described. A mountain of a dragon whose scales had dulled to ash gray, lying motionless except for the barely perceptible rise and fall of labored breathing. But even dying, she radiated a presence that made Marcus feel like he was standing in the shadow of a living mountain. "Great Mother," Stellar called out, their mental voice carrying across the cavern like a song. "I have returned, and I have brought the human Marcus Chen." Vorthak's massive golden eyes opened slowly, focusing on Marcus with an intensity that made him feel like he was being examined down to the atomic level. When she spoke, her voice was like distant thunder, but weakened by pain and exhaustion. "So," she rumbled, "this is the human who achieved what all the galaxy's experts could not. You are smaller than I expected." "Most miracles come in small packages," Marcus replied, surprising himself with his calm tone. Being in the presence of a dying dragon should have terrified him, but instead he felt a strange sense of purpose, as if everything in his life had led to this moment. He began unpacking his equipment, scanner arrays and diagnostic tools that looked absurdly primitive in the ancient grandeur of the crystal cavern. But as he worked, he noticed something that made him pause. The readings he was getting didn't match the medical reports he'd studied. "Stellar," he said slowly, "you told me the poison attacks the connection between dragons and cosmic forces, but I'm not detecting any toxins in your mother's system." "That is because the poison was never chemical," Vorthak explained, her voice growing weaker. "The Kethmori weapon was psychological, metaphysical. It convinced my people that they were severed from the universe, and belief became reality. I am the last because I am the last to believe I deserve to exist." Marcus felt the pieces clicking together in his mind, the solution forming like a picture emerging from static. "You're not dying from poison. You're dying from loneliness. Isolation," Vorthak corrected gently. "Dragons are creatures of connection, Marcus Chen. We draw strength not just from cosmic forces, but from the awareness that we are part of something greater than ourselves. I have spent 3,000 years believing I was alone in the universe, that my species was nothing but a memory. That belief has become a physical reality." "But you're not alone anymore," Marcus said, looking between Vorthak and Stellar. "Your child is here, alive and free. The dragon species continues. One hatchling cannot sustain the cosmic connections that keep an adult dragon alive," Vorthak replied sadly. "And soon Stellar will be alone as I have been alone. The cycle will simply repeat itself." Marcus sat down on a crystal outcropping, his mind racing through possibilities. This wasn't a medical problem or even a technological one. This was about belief, about connection, about the fundamental nature of what it meant to be part of something larger than yourself. "What if you weren't the only dragons left?" he asked suddenly. Both dragons stared at him with identical expressions of confusion. "Marcus Chen," Vorthak said carefully, "my people are extinct. I am the last adult of my kind." "Your people are extinct," Marcus agreed. "But what makes a dragon? Is it genetics? Is it biology? Or is it something deeper?" Stellar's eyes widened as they began to understand. "You're talking about adoption, about creating new dragons from other species." "I'm talking about connection," Marcus corrected. "You said dragons draw strength from being part of something greater. Well, what if that something greater wasn't just other dragons? What if it was the entire galaxy?" He stood up, pacing the length of the cavern as his idea took shape. "The galactic community has been trying to save you by treating you as a medical case, a technological problem to be solved. But you're not a machine that's broken. You're a being who's lost connection to their purpose in the universe." "What are you suggesting?" Vorthak asked, though Marcus could sense growing interest in her mental tone. "I'm suggesting that dragons weren't meant to be isolated guardians of ancient wisdom. You were meant to be teachers, guides, bridges between species and civilizations. The galaxy needs what dragons represent: perspective, wisdom, the long view of history. Marcus pulled out his communication array, fingers flying over the controls as he opened channels to contacts across known space. Stellar, can you project your consciousness across interstellar distances the way adult dragons can? With effort, yes. But why? Because, Marcus said with a grin that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, we're about to give the galaxy its first dragon broadcast in 3,000 years, and we're going to remind everyone what they've been missing. Vorthak struggled to raise her massive head, golden eyes blazing with something that might have been hope. You would have us reveal ourselves to the entire galaxy? Risk everything on the belief that other species might accept us? I would have you remember what you were meant to be, Marcus replied. Not the last of a dying race, but the first of a new era. Dragons who don't just survive in isolation, but thrive through connection with every species, every world, every story the galaxy has to tell. The crystal cavern seemed to pulse with anticipation as Marcus finished his preparations. Whatever happened next would either save the dragons or destroy them entirely. But as he looked at Stellar's fierce determination and Vorthak's growing hope, he knew they were about to find out whether the galaxy was ready for the return of its most ancient guardians. The galactic broadcast began at 2347 Standard Galactic Time, originating from coordinates that most civilizations had written off as a dead system. Marcus's jury-rigged communication array, boosted by Stellar's telepathic abilities and channeled through the resonant crystals of the ancient cavern, reached across hundreds of light-years in an instant. On Centauri Prime, Ambassador Zexhai was in the middle of filing his final report on the dragon situation when his communication console erupted with incoming signals. On the Synthetic Intelligence Collective's primary server cluster, processing nodes dedicated to pattern recognition suddenly detected something unprecedented in the quantum substrate of space-time. Across a dozen different space stations, alien crews paused in their duties as their instruments registered telepathic resonance on a scale not seen for millennia. Citizens of the galaxy, Vorthak's voice echoed across star systems, carried by technologies that bridge the gap between science and magic. I am Vorthak, last adult of the Draconic peoples, speaking to you from the crystal caverns of Zerion Prime. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Communication networks across the galaxy lit up with queries, confirmations, and wild speculation. The dragons weren't extinct. How was this possible? What did they want? For 3,000 years, Vorthak continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, I have hidden in isolation, believing that my people's time had passed, that we were nothing but memories in an indifferent universe. I was wrong. In his corner of the cavern, Marcus monitored the broadcast equipment while watching readings that should have been impossible. The crystalline formations around them were glowing brighter with each passing moment, resonating with telepathic energies that were being reflected and amplified by similar crystal formations on worlds throughout the galaxy. It was like watching a network come online after being dormant for millennia. My child, stellar heart who burns with ancient fire, has shown me that dragons were never meant to survive alone. Vorthak's voice carried across the stars. We are creatures of connection, of story, of the bonds that tie all consciousness together. And those bonds exist not just between dragons, but between all peoples who dare to dream of something greater than themselves. Stellar stood beside their mother, adding their own voice to the broadcast. We call out to every species, every civilization, every individual who has ever looked up at the stars and wondered what lies beyond the horizon of the possible. Dragons offer not domination but partnership, not ancient wisdom locked away in crystal caves but shared knowledge freely given. The reply came from an unexpected source. Captain Thextar of the merchant vessel Solar Wind, a gruff Coranian freighter pilot who had spent 40 years hauling cargo between the outer worlds, activated his ship's communication array and spoke into the void. Dragons. His voice rasped through space. This is Captain Thextar of the Independent Traders Alliance. If you're offering knowledge freely given, then I got a cargo hold full of questions that have been bothering me for decades. Within minutes, dozens of other voices joined the conversation. Scientists, explorers, philosophers, and ordinary citizens from across the galaxy reached out to the dragons, offering everything from technical problems to existential questions to simple requests for someone to talk. Marcus watched in amazement as his improvised communication system channeled voices from hundreds of worlds, The ancient crystals in the cavern pulsed with increasing brightness, each new connection adding to a growing network of consciousness that spanned star systems. "It's working," he said to Stellar, who was coordinating the incoming communications with telepathic abilities that seemed to grow stronger by the moment. "But can your mother handle this kind of sustained contact?" "Watch," Stellar replied, their mental voice filled with wonder. Marcus turned to look at Vorthak and gasped. The ancient dragon was changing before his eyes. Her dulled scales were beginning to regain their luster, shifting from ash gray to deep silver. Her golden eyes blazed with renewed vitality, and her massive form seemed to be growing more solid, more present, as if she was drawing strength from every voice that reached out across the void. "The isolation was killing her," Stellar explained, "but connection is healing her. Each new mind that touches ours adds to the web of consciousness that sustains draconic life." A new voice joined the galactic conversation, this one carrying the authority of high office. "Great Vorthak, this is Admiral Kexnel of the Galactic Defense Force. On behalf of the Triangulum Council, I offer formal recognition of draconic sovereignty and request immediate diplomatic contact." "I appreciate the offer, Admiral," Vorthak replied, her voice now carrying the full power of an adult dragon in perfect health. "But we do not seek sovereignty over others. We offer something more valuable, the role of mediator, teacher, and bridge between the many peoples of the galaxy." Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched the ancient dragon speak with beings who represented thousands of different species and civilizations. This was what he'd hoped for, not just saving the dragons, but showing the galaxy what they could become when species work together instead of apart. "There is, however, one matter of immediate importance," Vorthak continued, her golden eyes finding Marcus across the cavern. "I wish to publicly acknowledge the human Marcus Chen, whose ingenuity and courage made this moment possible. He succeeded where countless experts failed, not because he possessed superior knowledge, but because he refused to accept that the impossible could not be overcome." The galaxy-spanning conversation paused as hundreds of alien voices considered this information. A human had solved the dragon crisis, the same species that most civilizations considered primitive newcomers to the galactic community. "This Marcus Chen," came a new voice, synthesized and mechanical. "The collective would like to study his problem-solving methodologies, and the Cerithian Academy requests permission to document his techniques for our archives," added another. "The Independent Traders Alliance offers him a permanent consulting contract," Captain Thextar chimed in, "with full benefits and hazard pay." Marcus found himself laughing as offer after offer poured in from across the galaxy. Yesterday he'd been a barely known mechanic working out of a backwater space station. Today he was apparently the most famous human in known space. "I appreciate all the offers," he said into his communicator, "but I think I'll stick with impossible repairs, although I might be willing to take on some bigger projects now." Stellar moved to stand beside him, their great head lowering until they were eye level with the human who had saved their species. "Marcus Chen, friend and teacher, how can we ever repay what you have given us?" Marcus looked around the crystal cavern, now blazing with light as voices from across the galaxy continued their conversations with the dragons. He thought about the dying biopod that had sacrificed itself for Stellar's freedom, about Vorthak's 3 millennia of loneliness, about all the impossible problems that waited to be solved among the stars. "Help me build something," he said finally. "A place where species can come together to solve problems that seem impossible. A workshop for the galaxy where dragons and humans and anyone else who's crazy enough to try can work on fixing the unfixable." Vorthak's laughter rumbled through the cavern like distant thunder, a fitting legacy for the human who taught dragons to fly again. "Very well, Marcus Chen. Let us build something impossible together." As the galactic broadcast continued into the night, Marcus began sketching plans on his portable datapad. A space station perhaps, or a mobile facility that could travel between worlds, somewhere equipped to handle any problem, staffed by beings from every species willing to attempt the impossible. He looked up at Stellar, who was still coordinating communications with dozens of alien civilizations, and at Vorthak, whose presence filled the cavern with ancient wisdom made new again. Tomorrow would bring challenges he couldn't imagine, problems that would make saving the dragons look simple by comparison. Marcus Chen smiled and got back to work. After all, impossible was just another word for hasn't been done yet. 6 months after the Great Dragon broadcast, as historians were already calling it, the impossible workshop hung in space at the crossroads of 3 major trade routes, a testament to what could be accomplished when ingenuity met unlimited resources and a complete disregard for conventional engineering principles. The station was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Sections of crystalline dragon architecture grew seamlessly into human industrial modules, which connected to Centauri meditation gardens and Zerithian computational cores. At its heart sat Marcus's original workshop, expanded beyond recognition but still recognizable by the hand-painted sign that read, "Chen's Impossible Repairs. We fix what can't be fixed." Marcus stood in the main observation deck, watching as the latest impossible project took shape in the station's primary assembly bay. The Coranian merchant Captain Thextar had brought them a problem that defied all known physics, a cargo container that was somehow bigger on the inside than the outside, created by an extinct civilization, and now threatening to collapse into a spatial paradox that could swallow half the sector. "The dimensional stabilizers are holding," reported Dr. HFY, HFY's daughter, and the station's chief theoretical physicist. The young Triangulum scientist had inherited her father's diplomatic skills and added a passion for impossible mathematics that made her invaluable to the team. "Barely," added Arya, the evolved version of Marcus's AI assistant, who now coordinated the station's operations through a distributed network of crystalline processors. "The paradox is fighting back. It wants to resolve itself by eliminating the contradiction, which means, boom," Marcus finished grimly. "Big boom. Galaxy reshaping boom." In the assembly bay, Stellar worked with delicate precision to weave stabilizing energy fields around the anomalous container. The young dragon had grown tremendously over the past months, both physically and in their mastery of draconic abilities. They now stood nearly 5 meters tall, their scales shifting through a spectrum of colors that reflected their emotional state and the cosmic forces they channeled. "Mother," Stellar called through their telepathic link, "I could use your perspective on this pattern." Forthak's consciousness touched the problem from her position in the station's crystal gardens, where she maintained the growing network of dragon-forged communication crystals that allowed the workshop to coordinate with civilizations across the galaxy. Her health had returned completely, sustained by constant contact with thousands of minds across dozens of species. "The container exists in temporal flux as well as spatial distortion," she observed. "It is not just bigger inside than outside, it exists in a state where its past and future dimensions are overlapping with its present form." Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar headache that came with problems that existed beyond normal understanding. "So we're not just dealing with impossible geometry, we're dealing with impossible time?" "Precisely," came a new voice as Ambassador HFY materialized on the observation deck via holographic projection. The elder diplomat had become the workshop's unofficial liaison with galactic governments, helping to navigate the political complexities of their increasingly high-profile projects. "The Temporal Regulation Authority is becoming concerned," HFY continued. "They believe this container may be connected to the vanished Empire's final experiment, the one that supposedly erased them from existence." "Great," Marcus muttered. "We're not just risking a spatial paradox, we're risking a temporal one too." He activated his personal communicator, connecting to the team of specialists working on different aspects of the problem. Captain Thextar was coordinating containment protocols. Dr. Cynthia, a synthetic intelligence philosopher, was analyzing the logical paradoxes involved. Professor Reldar, an elderly Alterian historian, was researching similar artifacts in ancient archives. "All right, people," Marcus announced to the assembled team. "We've got a container that's bigger inside than outside, exists in multiple time states simultaneously, and might be connected to whatever made an entire galactic empire vanish from reality. Standard impossible repair protocols are now in effect." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Over the past months, the workshop had attracted the most brilliant misfits and determined problem solvers from across the galaxy. They were beings who thrived on challenges that others considered hopeless, united by the shared belief that impossible was just another word for interesting. "I've isolated the temporal fluctuations," Dr. HFY reported. The container isn't just existing in multiple time states, it's actively moving through them. Every few minutes, it shifts to a different moment in its own history, which explains why it keeps changing size, Stellar added, their mental voice carrying excitement despite the danger. We're not looking at a single impossible object. We're looking at multiple versions of the same object from different time periods. Marcus felt the familiar surge of inspiration that came when the pieces of an impossible puzzle started falling into place. Arya, can you track the pattern of temporal shifts? I need to know when it's going to be in its most stable configuration. Calculating, the AI replied. Based on current patterns, the container will achieve maximum stability in approximately 47 minutes, when all its temporal states briefly align. That's our window, Marcus declared, already moving toward the assembly bay. Stellar, I need you to maintain the dimensional stabilizers until the exact moment of alignment. Dr. HFY, prepare the temporal anchors. Captain Thexatar, have your containment fields ready to lock the thing in place the instant we succeed. As the team moved into action with practiced efficiency, Vorthak's presence filled the station with calm certainty. Marcus Chen, her mental voice reached him as he suited up for the dangerous work ahead. You continue to amaze me. 6 months ago, you saved my child and myself. Today, you work to prevent a temporal catastrophe that could unravel reality itself. Just another day at the office, Marcus replied, checking the seals on his environmental suit. Besides, someone's got to do the impossible work. Might as well be us. The next 45 minutes passed in a blur of precise calculations, split-second adjustments, and the kind of controlled chaos that the workshop had made its specialty. As the container shifted through its temporal states, the team tracked each change, preparing for the brief moment when all versions would exist simultaneously. Temporal alignment in 30 seconds, Arya announced. Dimensional stabilizers at maximum, Stellar reported, their massive form glowing with channeled energy. Containment fields ready, Captain Thextar confirmed. Marcus positioned himself at the control console, fingers hovering over the activation switches that would either save the sector or destroy it. Around him, the assembled team held their breath as the impossible container shimmered through its final temporal shifts. Alignment achieved, Dr. HFY called out. All temporal states are now synchronized. Now, Marcus shouted, triggering every system simultaneously. The container blazed with light as temporal anchors locked it into a single time state, while dimensional stabilizers forced its interior and exterior geometries to reconcile, for a moment that lasted an eternity. The very fabric of spacetime groaned under the strain of forcing paradox into coherence. Then, suddenly silence. The container sat in the assembly bay, looking perfectly ordinary except for a faint shimmer around its edges. Inside, Marcus could see through the transparent walls that it now contained exactly what it appeared to from the outside. A standard cargo container filled with perfectly normal trade goods. Impossible achieved, Arya announced with what sounded suspiciously like satisfaction. The paradox has been resolved without catastrophic reality failure. The observation deck erupted in cheers as beings from a dozen species celebrated another successful impossible repair. But Marcus was already thinking about the next challenge, the next problem that would require them to push beyond the boundaries of the possible. He looked around at his team, dragons and humans, artificial intelligences and energy beings, individuals who had found purpose in tackling problems that others considered hopeless. They had built something unprecedented, a place where impossible was just the starting point for innovation. So, he said to the assembled crowd, what do we fix tomorrow? The answer came in the form of a priority transmission from the edge of the galaxy, where something ancient and vast had awakened after eons of slumber and was apparently trying to communicate through gravitational waves and the selective manipulation of stellar radiation. Marcus grinned and cracked his knuckles. Well, team, looks like we're going to need a bigger workshop. As the impossible workshop adjusted course toward their next impossible mission, the galaxy watched with growing confidence. Whatever challenges lay ahead, there was now a place where the impossible could become inevitable, where the last dragon in existence worked alongside the most stubborn human in space, to prove that with enough ingenuity, determination, and complete disregard for common sense, anything could be fixed, even the impossible.